All right, so let's move on to industrialization. This is a pretty interesting topic and one that you can probably relate to a degree. So, industrialization is an increase in industry and manufacturing within an economy. So, you see factories essentially, where industry is more dominant than agriculture. So, it's more dominant in its GDP. More people are going to be employed with it. You see a ton of factories being sprung up and used. So we can see here industrial production compared to June 2007, and we have China, the European Union as a whole, US, and Japan. What I want you to take away from this graph here is that China's industrial production has been increasing very, very dramatically. So from 2007 to 2013, it increased 96%, which is a lot. While in the EU as a whole, which UK was a part of during this time, the US and Japan, it actually had negative increase. It declined. And then something I want you to take away from this picture on the right here is that industrialization with these factories, they emit a lot of air pollutants, and this can cause for air pollution and respiratory issue problems and a lot of other environmental and health effects that we'll get into. So China, because of its 96% increase in industrialization, they create a quarter of the fossil fuel generated carbon. The United States is in second place, but China is up there with 26% of it. So one would say that industrialization grows a dependency on fossil fuel usage, and I would agree on this as well. So, industrialization can cause environmental damage. Let's look into this a little bit, because there may be some misconceptions that you have here. So, in China, industrial discharges and inadequate wastewater treatment have led to water pollution in various rivers and lakes. So, contamination by heavy metals and chemicals used within these factories has negatively affected the water quality, as well as negatively affected aquatic ecosystems. This has led to the death of various organisms, plants and animals. When you discharge these chemicals, that can affect the pH of the waters, and certain animals and plants have different zones of tolerance. So if that pH increases and they can't handle it, they're going to die. Same thing if the pH decreases and the water becomes more acidic, those organisms are going to die. In Russia, the extraction of natural resources, industrial waste, and potential oil spills, because they have a strong oil economy, poses risks to the delicate Arctic environment. In Iran, major cities face air quality issues because of the factory emissions. In the UK, sites contaminated with heavy metals and other pollutants have seen required remediation efforts to lower those pollution quantities. In Mexico, the Santiago River has faced contamination from industrial effluents, such as chemicals, and this impacts the water quality and the ecosystem, similar to China. In Nigeria, they see rapid urbanization because their population is increasing exponentially, and they see industrial growth exponentially growing as well. And this has led to increased air pollution in these cities where manufacturing occurs. When industrialization occurs, typically you see urbanization occurs, because in these urban cities, that's where the factories are going to be located. And since people want to be located to where the jobs are, they're going to rapidly move to these urban cities. So now what? Governments can choose to respond or to not respond to environmental damage. We're going to look at both. So why would they not respond? Well, they could be ignorant to the long-term repercussions. I mean, what's the worst that we can have? What's the worst that we can have happen? Okay, so what? We discharge a few chemicals into the water. That's not going to do anything. They could be an authoritarian state, prioritizing benefits to political leaders. It's all about them over the citizens and societies. They could prioritize economic success and profits. If they manufacture more, they can sell more, make more profits. They could also have a lot of corruption within major industrial businesses, and this can occur through lobbying and bribes. Now, the governments can actually respond to them and respond to environmental damage, such as it being too severe to ignore. I mean, look at this picture. Would you want to live there? I mean, look, they shut down schools because the smog has been linked to hundreds of deaths because of the terrible air quality in Iran. Healthcare needed by affected citizens is too costly, so they may say, "Oh, we need to reduce these healthcare costs. Let's change our environmental effects." What is the word? Let's remediate our efforts. Remediate was the word I was looking for. There could be lobbying and citizen protests bringing these issues to their attention. It could be politically advantageous to support environmentalism, so they could get platforms and votes if they say and enforce certain environmental standpoints, because the citizens may promote and believe in them as well. They could also have pressure from the international community. They could see certain supranational organizations like the UN place sanctions on them and negatively affect their economy if they don't address certain environmental issues. So let's talk about Mexican acid. So in the state of Sonora, the Buenavista del Cobre, I believe that's how you pronounce it, it's a copper mine, owned by the Grupo Mexico, has been a focal point of environmental protests. It's a copper mine. So there's copper, it's a metal. In 2014, a massive spill of sulfuric acid contaminated some rivers. And this affected thousands of residents who rely on the rivers, as well as agricultural lands, so the food couldn't grow. So there was a decreased crop yield. It also affected the ecosystems as well. And this incident sparked widespread outrage and protests against the mining company and government authorities for inadequate regulation and oversight, because they saw it as their fault for not preventing it, which makes sense to a degree. All right, let's talk about Nigeria, oil, and action. Math here. Not really. The government, in collaboration with international partners and oil companies operating in the region, has initiated various cleanup and remediation, there's the word, projects to address environmental damage caused by oil spills. Oil spills can be very bad. I mean, just the example that comes to mind is birds, and they get oil in their feathers. They can't fly. And when they can't fly, they die. So a cleanup project was launched in 2006 by the HYPREP. And this is aimed to remediate contaminated sites and restore the ecosystems in Ogoniland. And this is an area that is very heavily impacted by oil pollution and oil spills. The government has taken steps to provide healthcare services and support to affected populations, establishing medical facilities, clinics, and outreach programs in the Niger Delta region where oil extraction is prominent. They diagnose and treat health conditions that are related to oil contamination, such as respiratory problems, skin diseases as oil sticks to the skin, as well as reproductive health issues. So there's a broad scope that oil has when they negatively affect humans. Additionally, the governments have partnered with NGOs and international agencies to deliver healthcare services, health education, and medical supplies to affected communities. So they're taking action. Let's talk about pollution in the UK, because they're not perfect either. So poor air quality, particularly in urban areas where manufacturing occurs, has been a long-standing concern since the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s. And this has been linked to air pollution that's linked to health problems such as respiratory diseases and cardiovascular conditions. So the molecule that I have here is ozone, O3. 3 oxygen molecules makes ozone. And that's an pollutant that is emitted. We actually have an ozone layer in the atmosphere that helps prevent the sun from just vaporizing the earth, essentially. And there's more to it. That's just the very, very bare minimum of it. Take AP Environmental Science if you want to learn more. Environmental groups and public health advocates have called for stricter regulations and measures to address air pollution. So there's been addressing this. The citizens are addressing this issue. The government has implemented measures as a response to these citizens addressing the issues, such as the clean air zones in cities, restrictions on emissions from vehicles through emissions like the ultra-low emission zone in London, and regulations to phase out the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles by 2030. And these actions all aim to reduce air pollution, that's their common goal, and protect the public health. So here we can see nitrogen dioxide background concentration. So it's kind of low in majority of the UK in its surface area. However, it does have concentrations in its cities in England. And the background concentration is gotten a lot higher, actually. So this is for PM 2.0. So this is particulate matter, which is another pollutant as well. We can see here that it's also very prominent, not just in London, but outside London as well. So it can spread throughout the entire country. All right, so now discussing China and peer pressure, because even the Chinese government can fall into peer pressure. So as China seeks to maintain their economic growth, remember they have the second highest GDP in the world, and they also want to maintain economic competitiveness in the global market and maintain their role as an export-oriented country. There has been pressure from international trade partners and investors who bring in FDI to address environmental concerns that have resulted from their production. Consumers and businesses in importing countries have become very much so more conscious of environmental and social responsibility issues, particularly within the last 30 to 50 years. And this is thanks to the development of transportation and particularly communication technologies. Government implemented green finance initiatives have been implemented to support investments in renewable energy, clean technologies, and environmentally friendly projects. China has encouraged industries, and by encourage I mean they say they promote it, but it doesn't really get enforced. And they quote unquote encourage to adopt cleaner production methods, reduce pollution, and they comply with environmental standards to enhance market access and competitiveness in global supply chains. Essentially, they're saying they're enforcing it and working on solving the environmental issues just so their investors will continue to invest with them. Regulatory agencies such as the Ministry of Ecology and Environment conduct inspections, impose fines for non-compliance, and enforce penalties for violations of environmental laws. Companies found to be violating such regulations may face sanctions, closure, or suspension of production licenses. So, in theory, this regulation could work into capping environmental output and effects of individual organizations. All right, let's move on to Russia. So Russia's been embracing environmental initiatives such as renewable energy development that can attract investment and stimulate economic growth, of course. Russia's vast renewable energy potential, particularly in areas such as wind and hydropower, which is where most of the investments in development and research are going into, have presented opportunities for investment and innovation. Participation in such programs like the Green Climate Fund or the bilateral partnerships with other countries have provided financial support for these projects. They're the funding for these renewable energy projects and have led to infrastructure and other building efforts. Because, wind energy needs like wind turbines, and that costs money. You need people to pay for that. Russia is a member of the International Renewable Energy Agency, the RENA, and collaborates with other member states to promote renewable energy deployment and technology transfer. And this is just someone named Irina. I think she's an actress. Iran, the water. This is actually a picture of Chinese water torture. I thought it'd be a fun little addition here to the slideshow. So, Iran has faced pressure from neighboring countries and international organizations like the UN over their environmental sustainability, particularly shared water resources regarding rivers and waterways that cross national borders. Concerns about water scarcity, how much water they actually have, over extraction, and upstream dam construction have led to tensions and disputes with neighboring countries like Turkey and Iraq, who also have water sustainability issues that they're trying to address, or they have connections to these water bodies that Iran also has. It has also led to pressures from international organizations like the UN. The government, as a result, has implemented various water conservation measures and strategies, such as construction of dams for water storage, investment in water-efficient irrigation techniques, as well as public awareness campaigns to promote water conservation and sustainable water usage practices, such as for agricultural irrigation or water consumption from an individual basis. And if you look up top, that's Lewis from Suits, and he kind of looks like a beaver, and the resemblance is uncanny. I also thought I would include that as well, just for fun. All right, let's talk about some more responses to industrialization, which is really what we've been talking about for like the last 10 minutes probably. So other responses can include physically moving factories, implementing green technologies with subsidies, which means the governments are promoting and funding and giving money to these industries for them to comply, as well as engaging in infrastructure development that promotes renewable energy, such as wind turbines, as well as environmental regulation with enforcement, such as fines or loss of licenses. The UK has been a global leader for the development of offshore wind farms, projects such as the Hornsea, I don't know. It's a wind farm off the Yorkshire coast. Yorkshire coast, and the Beaches Wind Farm in the Moray Firth These are examples of investments in renewable energy infrastructure. So this is a picture from one of those um, projects. I believe this is the one off the Yorkshire coast. Physically moving factories and implementing such technologies, that's growing in China. Passing laws that require nationwide conservation to hybrid and battery-powered automobiles can address air pollution problems in the major cities where they're really prominent because all the cars are concentrated, and that leads to traffic as well as the concentration of these air pollutants that cars emit. There's also the factories. The industry emit pollutants as well into the air from their production. So if you limit these methods, these processes that are used in factories and automobiles, you can limit the amount of pollution. So in Mexico, cities have introduced such measures such as restrictions on vehicle usage during high pollution periods. In Nigeria, they've created a working environmental regulatory agency. In China, they've banned certain types of solid waste such as plastics and unsorted paper. And that's very recent. It actually started in 2017. Other responses include developing infrastructure and other mechanisms to respond to health crises related to systemic pollution. So they can improve efficiency of road, rail, and other ports, and that can reduce the dependency and usage of fossil fuels and look for ways to incorporate green energy within infrastructure environments. The UK has been investing particularly in sustainable transportation infrastructure, and they've nationalized certain rail industries. And these efforts have been made to decrease air pollution in urban areas. Some cities in Mexico have been focusing on creating green spaces to absorb pollutants and improve overall city quality. So this is a picture on the right here taken from Mexico City. So this is a green space that's been recently developed to promote environmental sustainability and reduce air pollution and other effects of industrialization. Let's talk about austerity measures. Austerity. So governments concerned with budget deficits, which means they're spending more than they're making, can result from world market fluctuations, and they usually adapt austerity measures to overcome these deficits, which results in funding cuts to state programs. So they're trying to cut government spending so they spend less than what they make. You want to either break even, or in reality, you really want to be in a budget surplus where you're making more than you spend. Can anyone guess what the United States is in? Cough, deficit. So this can include budget cuts to programs such as education or tax increases. So you can actually just make more money and spend the same amount. So in the UK, there's been significant cuts to public housing, welfare payments, quangos, and other social services. And this has been very controversial. And the political party that's pushing these is the Conservative Party. And individuals who disagree with this do not identify themselves with the Conservative Party. And cuts to public housing have been linked to unemployment and homelessness. Welfare payments have been linked to decreased access to food and other necessary resources. In Mexico, all public servants, including scientists at federally funded labs, are required to get the president's approval for paid trips abroad. So since they are public servants, they have to get public approval, essentially, to take trips abroad that are considered part of their service, which means they have to be paid for by the government. So the government is trying to cut spending on these trips by having to approve all of these measures. This is actually very recent. I just looked up austerity measures in Mexico, and this was one of them, and I thought it was kind of interesting. And this is meant to address inefficiencies in the system as well, and also weed out anyone who's studying abroad or researching abroad for measures and causes that aren't really beneficial or purposeful. It's very highly controversial. So what are the pros and cons to austerity measures? So a pro can be it helps government regain control over their finances because they're reducing reliance on borrowing, which is called fiscal discipline. They're spending less money, which is good. It contributes to long-term fiscal and monetary sustainability. It ensures that governments can provide their required services without accumulating debt, which can negatively affect the economy of the entire country and the people within it. It can also control inflation pressures by reducing aggregate demand. That's not really a concept you have to know, but it's just a little fact you should just stick it in your mind a little bit. And if you reduce inflation, purchasing power of the citizens will increase. Now, what are the cons? The cons include economic contraction and a short-term GDP decline. In the long term, this is supposed to actually help the economy, but in the short term, it could actually lead to a smaller economy size, which is called economic contraction. It can also lead to unemployment and social and political unrest via dissenting opinions. It can also cause deflation, which can lead to further economic contraction and the reduction of investment. All right, let's talk about more economic liberalization. And we're talking about this topic a lot. So what does that mean? It means College Board really loves it. And you can probably expect to see it on your AP exam. So trade liberalization affects the growth of domestic and foreign businesses. So the amount of direct foreign investment, your FDI, foreign exchange rates, population movement, and the quality of environment are affected by trade liberalization. Reducing tariffs, reducing these import taxes may lower consumer costs for certain goods and services, because let's say I'm growing a crop and I'm importing it, that can actually come in at a lower price than if I was buying it locally produced. And this comes at the expense of those local domestic industries. Increasing tariffs may protect domestic industry and provide jobs and profits to local businesses against foreign imports, but it is at the expense of higher consumer prices most of the time. So what if we cut tariffs through liberalization? How would that affect FDI? Well, if we cut those taxes, imports are probably going to increase because those importers are not going to have, they're going to have less barriers into bringing their goods and services into a country. Now, what about currency demand? Well, if you have increased trade, you're going to have increased demand for the currency. Now, there's a lot of factors impacting that. It's not something you really have to focus on for this course, but if you increase currency flow and exchange, it's going to increase the demand for the better, more valuable currency. Thanks so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It's free, which means it costs $0, and it really does help me out. Leave a comment down below with any questions. I'll be happy to answer them. There's some links down below in the description with practice tests, key terms, guided notes, all that fun stuff. Head on over to the next AP Comparative video on some really cool political stuff.